time and time again. History has proven that when working women decide to fight together, they win together. And it's that very same fighting spirit that has guided Elizabeth Warren's entire campaign. This campaign is about restructuring the rules of power, about fighting to put power in the hands of the people who need it most. That's why, on November 21st, Elizabeth will tell the story of a group of persistent Black women who transformed domestic work and the entire labor movement as we know it. That is the story of the 1881 Atlanta washerwomen's strike. Black women who weren't fairly treated, but fought back just as they do today. From her launch speech at a textile mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where women workers who were fed up with working conditions said enough, to her rally at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City.
Think of Frances and the Triangle women.
Elizabeth leans on history to remind her about the fight we're in and how much further we have to go. Because only history can teach us about how we became the nation we are today, and those lessons can make this a nation that works for everyone. If there were ever a time to draw strength from the fighters who have come before us and finally learn the lessons of our history, that time would be right now.
Differently able caregiver, born and raised in Valdosta, Georgia. I'm such a Georgian, I consider myself a Georgia peach. And just like the peach, I'm a little fuzzy on the outside, sweet and juicy on the inside, with a hard, squiggly core. And like the core, as a worker in Georgia, all the cracks and grooves and ups and downs I have had to contend with. Like Dorothy Bolden, who was an organizer of domestic workers, raising her children and doing her work in this neighborhood, I am out here doing work. I came into the domestic workers movement to advocate for them getting the same health care as every other worker. As a disabled person, I'm often called on by my family, that real care work, the unpaid kind, from nannying to elder care to aftercare. Every day in Georgia, there are a ton of us going to work, working hard, that can't afford to get sick. And when we do, there is no program for us. We are fighting right now for a federal domestic workers' Bill of Rights. I encourage you not just to vote, but to find your passion and find an organization out there that you can exercise that passion in. Yeah. It's a lot of work out here, and we need everybody up and at it. Thank you.
Angela Peoples and the leadership of Black Women For.
Level up, 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 level up. All this on me so yummy. so yummy. No, you want this yummy, yummy all in your tummy. Level up, 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 level up. All this yummy so yummy, all this sauce so yummy. No, you want this yummy, yummy all in your tummy.
Hello. Good evening. Wow, you all look amazing. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you to the students of Clark Atlanta University for having us. I also want to thank Paris Hatcher for honoring and remembering Alexis Crawford and for reminding us to defend Black womanhood. Yes. My name is Angela Peoples, and I am the leader of a group called Black Women 4. I'm an organizer, I'm a strategist, I'm a mama, and I'm so honored to be joined here on this stage by these women who are just a small group, an important group, but a small group of the hundreds of Black, trans, and cis women and gender non-conforming and non-binary people that have endorsed Senator Elizabeth Warren to be the President of the United States. We, Black women, have been at the forefront of many of the social movements, the protests, and the policy fights that have been won and lost over the past decades. Whether it's the demand that the police stop killing Black people, the fight to make access to affordable health care a right, the fight to protect our voting rights, or occupying Wall Street. It is our commitment, it is our sacrifice, and it is our leadership of progressive Black folks that have set the stage for a Democratic primary where our issues and our movements are in the spotlight. And since Black women led us here, I think it only makes sense that we have a say, that we are front and center in deciding who will lead the coalition to defeat Donald Trump and bring about the future that our children deserve. I'm from a small town called Ypsilanti, Michigan. Shout out Ypsilanti, Michigan, what's up? Both of my parents are in education, and they always instilled in me and my siblings that an education could be the great equalizer. Yes, there's racism, yes, there's sexism, yes, there's homophobia, yes, there's class discrimination. But if anyone can just access an education, they can change their stars. They can overcome those things. Now, that idea grounded my work for 8 years as a student organizer and then as a policy advocate to make college more affordable and accessible for people who look like me. That is until the summer of 2014. In the summer of 2014, my whole worldview changed. When Michael Brown was killed and left in the street by the Ferguson police, and when I watched armored tanks and tear gas used against the community that was expressing their righteous anger and pain at the death and the loss of their beloved Mike, when I watched those things happen, something inside me broke. The belief that simply getting a good education could be that great equalizer shattered. It was in those moments, with tears running down my face for what felt like days, that I began to understand that we had to stop moving things around on a table that was set up from the beginning to harm us, to oppress us, to kill us. No. What we needed was to flip the table over. We need to flip the table over and set a new table on our terms that works for us.
Yes.
It seems like I have some table flippers in the audience. Any other table flippers in the audience? Good company, good company. We needed to flip the table and reset it in a way that ensures that the power and the resources are in the hands of those that are most marginalized, and in a way that demand that the politicians fight for the big structural changes that we need and not just what they think the wealthy elites can tolerate. I've been flipping tables since that heartbreaking summer in 2014. It is that disruptive spirit that moved us to start Black Women For, and is that disruptive spirit that has brought me to endorse Senator Elizabeth Warren to be the president. So are you all with me? Throughout this summer, we surveyed over 500 self-identified progressive Black women and gender nonconforming folks. We asked them what it would take for them to come out and take action for their favorite candidate, for their progressive candidate. And the overwhelming response was community.
Yes.
Folks don't want to go it alone. And let's face it, there are very few welcome parties for Black folks when we come out and step into the political fray. The threat of verbal and physical violence that we face simply for speaking our truth is real, it's present, and it can feel intimidating. But I know one thing for sure. There is no political revolution without us. In this country's history, there is no fight for transformative change. There is no movement to shift the balance of power away from the super rich into the hands of people like us. There is no moment that has opened the door for more people to live in their full human dignity that did not have Black women at the helm. Senator Warren understands this, and she is ready to lead with us. We know that we cannot wait. The Army for basic reforms and tweaks around the edges and returning to normal is already trying to convince us that we should vote for a candidate that can win over the votes of white suburban people in the Midwest. Black voters and people of color are once again being asked to go along so that we can get along. Those days are over. They're done. Instead of aligning with the candidate with the most name recognition or the candidate that is the least common denominator, we are going to organize and mobilize progressive Black voters for a candidate who understands that we know what we need to keep our communities safe, whole, and thriving. We are going to throw our own parties for Black folks who are ready to join in and get in this fight in this very important political moment. We started Black Women For to answer the question of what is possible when progressive Black folks flex their political power. The answer is this. We are possible. You are possible. 2 weeks ago, we announced 100 progressive Black organizers and activists, leaders and artists and authors who endorsed Senator Warren for president. And that list has grown ever since. And today, I am proud to announce that we have over 300 people that have put their names on the line for Senator Warren. So what about you? Are you all in? If you are a trans or cis black woman or a gender nonconforming or non-binary person, and you want to join the Black Women for Warren squad, because we're pretty cute, eh? Also, very powerful. If you want to join our squad, we would love to have you. Go to blackwomen4.com, that's women with an X, not an E, and sign the endorsement statement and join us. It is now my extreme honor and very distinct pleasure to introduce a woman that I admire greatly. Someone who is leading the way on so many issues that are critical to our communities, including completely dismantling and changing our criminal legal system and decriminalizing sex work. The baddest woman in the U.S. Congress. And yes, another Black woman for Warren. Congressman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts.
Follow me on Instagram because I said come through, and you sure did. Looking good, Atlanta. It is wonderful to be with you this evening. I want to say I cannot believe that I am here on Student Movement Boulevard at Clark Atlanta University. What a sight you are to behold. Hand clap for yourselves because you're taking time out of your lives to claim a stakehold in our democracy, and that is something to celebrate. I want to say thank you to Black Women for that kind introduction and for the work that you do in community every single day, honoring the legacy and the tradition of Black women as table shakers, as truth tellers, and as justice seekers. As I look out at this crowd tonight, I can't help but to think of the Black woman that has played the most formidable influence and role in my life. That is my shero, the woman who gave me my roots and my wings. May she rest in power, my mother, Sandy Presley. Now, a parent is a child's first teacher, and she taught me that Black women are the backbone of our democracy. But she didn't just tell me that. She showed me that. Every day of her life, I grew up on her hip at tenants' rights meetings, knocking on doors, born and raised in the tradition of activism. My mother, Sandy Presley, she labored in love for community, and she labored for mere survival of herself and our community. Because when you are born into an inequitable world, you are born immediately into struggle. My mother reminded me often that in life there's a difference between your job and your work. Your job is what pays the bills, and your work, with a capital W, is the work of the upliftment of community. Come on. Now, Sandy Presley did that every day, and she was a super voter. She never missed an election. On election day, she would take my hand and draw that curtain closed and pull that lever. And like far too many Americans, we lived in the residual impact of short-sighted and racist policies that made us feel small and unseen. But my mother always reminded me that on election day, we were powerful. Yes. Yes. I believed her then, and I still do. And I know that every one of you in this room know about and believe in that same power. You are disruptors. You are innovators. You are creatives. You are activists. You are foot soldiers. You are movement and community builders. And you know, it's not that when folks don't show up, it's because they don't know enough to know better. It's because they know too much. They have broken hearts from broken promises because of broken systems. You know, we live with the legacy of decades of racist policies and powerful interests that have calcified inequality in America. You know that our values and our civil rights, which, by the way, we had to earn, and basic common sense are under assault every single day. Chaos, callousness, corruption, you name it. Every day, the occupant of this White House is spewing hateful rhetoric and advancing cruel policies. The cruelty is the point. He's trying to reinstate the death penalty, rob our babies of their school lunches, gut fair housing, and burden our scholars with crippling debt. That, family, is the bad news. But I didn't come here tonight just to tell you bad news. I came to tell you about the good news. Look at somebody next to you and say with me, good news. Good news. The good news is that this moment calls each of us to action. The good news is that in this moment of crisis, we can lean on our resilience while lifting up the brilliance and innovation of our communities. The good news is that even though this is one of the darkest chapters in the history of our nation, we, the people, all the people, have a chance to write our next chapter together. A chance to make big structural change with our next president, Elizabeth Warren. You see, I'm talking about good news, family. The good news is that right here, right now, in this moment, we can draw strength from our truth-telling, from one another, roll up our sleeves, focus our eyes, and purpose our feet on what is possible. Yes. Every day I walk into this world, steady in my step and sure of my mandate, because I am Sandy Presley's daughter. Because she spoke my name. She spoke life and consciousness into me. So Atlanta, who spoke your name? Who called you to action? Speak their name and say thank you right now. Thank you. Thank you to the black woman who prayed for you. Thank you to the black woman who lotioned an elbow. Thank you to the black woman who saw greatness in you and poured into you. Thank you. As we commit ourselves to the task of writing the next chapter of history together, we know that each of us stands on the shoulders of sheroes. Yes. Now, truthfully, too often those on the front lines, black women, in the fight for economic, racial, and social justice have been relegated to the footnotes of history. But not in this movement. There'll be no more hidden figures. We are bringing forward the stories of those who came before us. But don't forget, we are also writing history in real time. Elizabeth Warren has long been my partner in good and my sister in service. But now I can't wait for her to be our president. Yes. You see, because for Elizabeth, it has never been about one person. Right. It has never been about one single story. She knows that we live in nuance and intersectionality. She is not just a great teacher. She is a student of the people. Right. She has spent her life studying systems of oppression to dismantle them. She has spent years listening in small church basements and in big gymnasiums like this one. And what I know to be true is this. She carries in her heart, deep down in her heart, each story she hears, each lesson she learns. Now, I know you've heard all about Elizabeth's plans, but here's the things. The plans are about power. The plans are about shifting power and centering the people.
Yes.
I have known Elizabeth for a decade, and when it comes to injustice, she calls it like she sees it. She listens, she learns, and then she acts.
Yes.
The reason her plans are so deep and so structural is because they are written by, with, and for the people. She knows that the people closest to the pain so often have the best solutions.
Yes.
So whether it's her commitment to take on the epidemic of Black maternal mortality, to center the LGBTQIA+ community, or to follow the lead of activists on the best way to transform our broken criminal legal system,
Yes.
Senator Warren takes the lessons she learns from listening to community and applies them to every single fight she takes on. That's why her plan to cancel student debt and make public college free also closes the Black-white wealth gap. It's why her housing plan addresses the despicable legacy of redlining. And when folks are rationing their insulin because their coverage doesn't cut it, we need Elizabeth Warren in the White House to make Medicare for all law of the land. And at a time when bullets are tearing through the flesh of our neighbors, decimating our communities, leaving in its wake first and secondary trauma for generations, because Republicans are too scared, too cowardly to break from the NRA, we need Elizabeth Warren in the White House to fight for real gun reform. This is a fight for the soul of our democracy.
Yes.
And we can't afford to be modest in our aspirations.
Yes.
The stakes are higher than they've ever been before. There are lives hanging in the balance. So we cannot afford to dream small or to accept business as usual.
Yes.
These are unprecedented times, which demand unprecedented leadership, unprecedented organizing, unprecedented mobilizing. We need change, and we need it now. Big structural change.
Yes.
Can't wait. Atlanta, it is my honor and my privilege to call up my friend, my partner in good, my senator, and our next president, Elizabeth Warren.
Hello, Atlanta. Oh, and thank you, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. You're amazing. I have known Ayanna for nearly a decade, and together we have fought against for-profit colleges that cheat working families. We've stood in the gap for families torn apart by the epidemic of gun violence. We have gone toe-to-toe with the Trump administration as we fought to protect immigrant families. And yes, Ayanna is a fighter, and she's the kind of fighter I love, a sister warrior who knows how to win. So thank you all for coming here tonight. You know, it feels so good to be here with all of you on the historic campus of Clark Atlanta University. Can we just hear it for America's HBCUs? So I wanted to stick around after last night's debate because this city has been at the heart of America's fight for justice. Atlanta is a city that honors fighters. Fighters like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Bayard Rustin, and Septima Clark. You know, and I have learned that no matter what fight you're in today, no matter how steep the climb feels, there are fighters who are here before you. Fighters we can learn from. And the fighters I want to talk about tonight are Black women. As a white woman, I will never fully understand the discrimination, the pain, the harm that Black Americans have experienced just because of the color of their skin. I'm not here tonight to tell you about a painful history that Black Americans have experienced and know all too well. I'm here today for a very different reason. I'm here today to make a commitment. When I am President of the United States, the lessons of Black history will not be lost.
Warren, 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 Warren. Dream big! Dream big! Dream big!
All right. So let's talk a little. About the lessons Okay. So, you bet. I love you. We're good. We're good. So let's talk about fighters and fighters in history, because the lessons of history will live in every part of my presidency. And I will ask you to hold me accountable for those lessons every single day. So I know everybody wants to be heard, and that's a good thing. But I want to tell a story. And I want to tell a story that starts in the year 1881. After the tyranny of slavery, thousands of African Americans came to Atlanta, hoping to build new lives full of promise. The promise that they could fall in love and build homes and families. The promise that they could earn a wage that would support those families. The promise that they could plan for the future, for their own future, and for the futures of their children and their grandchildren. Black people came to Atlanta with hope in their hearts, but what they found was crushing disappointment. The war for freedom from enslavement had been won, but the fight for equality, the fight for opportunity was just beginning. Black women and girls found that pretty much the only work that white employers allowed them to do was the work that they had been forced to do when they had been enslaved, and that's caring for white families. Thousands of women here in Atlanta scratched out a living as washerwomen. The work was heavy. Monday through Saturday, they made their way to white families, trudging from house to house, picking up piles of dirty laundry. Once they were back at their own homes, they toted gallons of water from pumps and wells. They lifted and poured the buckets of water into washing tubs made from beer barrels. They built fires to heat water. They scrubbed the clothes using the soap they made themselves, so caustic that it left their hands raw. They hung the laundry to dry. And then came the ironing with heavy irons heated in front of a fire. By nightfall, everything was folded and stacked, ready to be dropped off the next morning when they picked up a new pile of dirty laundry.
I want to say something. No one is here to quiet you, least not this black woman, who know what it is when people have tried to put me in a corner and tell me to be silent. You are welcome here. The senator is here to talk about the contributions fighters like you have made to history. So in this moment, I want to just say something. So in this moment, there are many people that do not know this story because we have been rendered as a historical footnote in history. So I am going to appeal to you to not dishonor that history. We are grateful. are grateful for your activism and your voice, and you are welcome here. And we would love to convene after this about the issue that you are here to stoke our consciousness about. But when these women have been ignored this long, this is their moment, and we are going to hear the story.
So the story had started in 1881 about the black washerwomen and about how hard the work was and how, day after day, they continued this work for $1 a day. They worked and they worked, and the cycle continued. The pay was so meager that a family that depended only on the wages of a woman lived at the bare edge of survival. Now, as they worked, the women talked among themselves about their lives and about their futures. And then one day, they had enough. It was July 1881 when 20 of Atlanta's black washerwomen threw down their washboards, walked away from their barrels, and formed a union, the Washing Society. Their first order, strike. Their demands, higher wages, and to be treated with dignity. Now, the washerwomen had a plan. Black women led, but soon the handful of white washerwomen who had stood on the sidelines realized that the only way to better wages for themselves was to follow the lead of the black women. It's a story of working women standing together. And in the space of 3 weeks, 20 women on strike became 200 women. And 200 women on strike became 2,000 women. And 2,000 became 3,000. Now, from the beginning, employers dismissed these women, certain that they would be back to work in no time. But the women stood together. So the employers struck back. They warned that they would use their money and use their power to start their own modern industrial laundry service to replace those washerwomen permanently. Black women, then and now, are no strangers to facing resistance when they fight for justice, and black women, then and now, don't give up easy. Even in the face of imminent violence, black women refused to be defined by fear. So the women of the Washing Society persisted. Many of the employers were also landlords, and they threatened the striking washerwomen with huge increases in their rent and with eviction. Still, the women persisted. The employers doubled down. They got the local police to fine members of the union and to arrest strikers. Still, the women persisted. And when the city council threatened to intervene, the women sent a public letter to the mayor of Atlanta, and they said they would not back down. They went right to the heart of the matter, and I quote, they said, "We mean business." And then it happened. The employers, the city council, the powerful white citizens, they all backed down. The women won. Think about it. Here it was less than 2 decades after the end of enslavement, nearly half a century before women would even have the right to vote. And right here in Atlanta, a handful of black women had built a movement strong enough to force an entire city of wealthy elites and public officials to back down. Now, we don't know exactly how many of the washerwomen won higher wages, but word of their success spread across Atlanta. Soon other African American workers began making demands. Black cooks, black maids, black nurses got in the fight. And in some cases, not many, but some, they won. The implications of this fight were enormous, and so was the response. As the idea that black and white workers could make real structural change if they fought side by side began to spark to life, an evil force was already mobilizing against it. In 1883, just 2 years after the successful washerwomen's strike, and as other groups were just beginning to exercise some political muscle, the Supreme Court struck down a civil rights law that had been passed in the wake of the Civil War. Now, that law had promised equal civil and legal rights for all, and its loss was a body blow to our fragile, reconstructed democracy. And the racist politicians used the opportunity to double down. They divided black people and white people in every moment of every day of every life, using force and violence and intimidation to oppress blacks and to ensure that blacks and whites would never come together to stand up against those in power. Now, I don't need to tell anyone here about the cruelty and indignity that Jim Crow inflicted on black people in America. I don't need to tell anyone here about the barriers that powerful people and institutions put up to destroy black wealth, to endanger black health, to pollute black communities, and to confine black people. Barriers, formal and informal, had their roots in Jim Crow laws. Black history is American history. And American history teaches us that racism has for generations shaped every crucial aspect of our economic and political system. Racism told white workers in the South not to organize because so long as you're white, you're a little better off than your brother down the line. A little better off, even though neither of you has a union to protect you or a pension to support you. Racism told segregated white communities they should just abandon their public schools rather than let their kids learn and play with black children. And the consequence? Generations of America's black and white school children lost out. And by the 2000s, racism told everyone in Washington to look the other way when the banks were testing out predatory loans in black and brown communities. And then those banks spread those loans across the market and crashed the entire economy for all working people. And to this day, racism still whispers the convenient lie to some white people that if your life has problems, you should blame them. People who don't look like you. So I just want to speak directly to the question on some white people's minds when we talk about the need to address what our government has done in black communities. The uncomfortable question of what will this mean for me? The wealthy and the well-connected want us to believe that more for your neighbors has always meant less for you. But the truth is, when we come together, we can all move forward. When black civil rights warriors won the fight for voting rights, voter turnout increased across the South for blacks and for whites. When black people won the fight to end school segregation and demand federal funding for their children's education, poor white children got better educations too. The lesson is clear. Racism doesn't just tear apart black and brown communities, it keeps all working people down. Racism props up the wealthy and the powerful, leaving them free to take more wealth and more power for themselves. Which takes me to Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't create this divide and conquer system, but he wouldn't be in power without it. After 8 years, that's right. After 8 years of progress under President Obama, Trump's embrace of white supremacy, white nationalism, and corruption threatened to break our democracy beyond repair. Today, our government is working great for billionaires, working great for giant corporations, working great for those who cheerfully suck up as much wealth as they can and never glance back at who gets left behind. Divide and conquer is an old political tactic, and it comes in all sorts of ugly flavors. Racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic. It is the phobic that is the key part, because it's all about fear. Politics based in fear. The rich and the powerful want us to be afraid of each other. And why? Because they are afraid of us. Afraid of our numbers, afraid of seeing us stand together, afraid that we will take up each other's fights as our own, and afraid that means they will lose their power. But even in the face of racism, hatred, bigotry, and corruption, Black history, American history, teaches us how to confront this moment of challenge. Black history teaches us how to stand up when you're told to sit down. Black history teaches us how to speak out when we're told to be silent. Black history teaches us how to march on even when the road gets rough. And now, more than ever, all of us have to embrace the lessons of Black history. The rich and powerful aren't just going to give away power. No, if we want power, we have to fight for it. Yep. And like the women of the Washing Society, that is exactly what we will do. America was founded on principles of liberty and built on the backs of enslaved people. It is time for our government to face this truth. Time for America to have a full-blown national conversation about reparations. Time to adopt H.R. 40, Sheila Jackson Lee's reparations plan. Time to do what's right so that our nation can begin to heal. This is a big step, but slavery is not the only history we must confront. Jim Crow was the lived reality in America up through the 1960s. In 1964, the official policy of the U.S. government was to help families buy homes and build up wealth one generation after another for white families, not for Black families. And segregation in employment, in travel, even in marriage, meant that African Americans were closed off from one opportunity after another. And there were some quieter and sometimes even more deadly forms of state-sponsored discrimination. Government redlining meant that too often toxic waste dumps and polluting factories were located far away from white communities and right next to Black communities. The 1994 crime bill exacerbated the mass incarceration that locked up millions of Black men and women. So don't talk about race-neutral laws. The federal government helped create the racial divide in this country through decades of active state-sponsored discrimination, and that means the federal government has a responsibility to fix it. And I have a plan for that. In fact, I have a lot of plans for how we can begin to fix it together. My housing plan will help families living in formerly redlined areas buy a home and start building the kind of wealth that was denied to their parents and grandparents. My plan for a Green New Deal will put racial and environmental justice at the center of our response to climate change. My health care plan will bring down the costs of prescription drugs and tackle the risks of Black maternal mortality that is literally killing Black women and their babies. My public education plan will put $800 billion new dollars in federal money into our public schools and quadruple the funding for schools that teach low-income children. My student debt cancellation plan are so ready. So my student debt cancellation plan will help close the black-white wealth gap in America. And just one more here. My higher education plan will invest $50 billion in historically black colleges and universities. One more thing about those plans. They're all paid for, not by raising taxes 1 penny on working families. They're all paid for by asking the wealthy and the well-connected to just pay a fair share. The billionaires can cry all they want. It's time for a wealth tax in America. 2 cents. I'm ready. 2 cents. 2 cents. Yep. Just 2 cents. And there's more. When it comes to protecting black women, we need to face the hard truth that black women and girls are being brutalized at alarming rates by people they know and trust. The murder of Alexis Crawford, a Clark Atlanta student, is an unspeakable tragedy, and my heart goes out to the Crawford family. Alexis's story happens every day across this country. We need to take meaningful action to protect women, particularly women of color. Black trans women are especially vulnerable to violence and hate crimes. At least 21 black trans women have been killed this year alone. This is an epidemic, and we need to call it out. As a nation, we need to stand with and for women who face one attack after another. That also means protecting abortion access. I stand with the black and brown women who have been leading the fight for reproductive justice all across this country. And it is time to repeal the Hyde Amendment once and for all. The black-white wealth gap was created by decades of government-sponsored discrimination on housing and employment, and it's time now to close it. So here's one of my plans. When I'm in the White House, I will create a small business equity fund for entrepreneurs of color. Get out there and start a business. On day one of my presidency, I will take executive action to boost the wages of Black and brown women. And remember the washerwomen we started this with? It is time to take up their cause. Black women today still make up a large proportion of domestic and child care workers, and those women are still overworked, undervalued, and underpaid. It's time for all of us to stand with domestic workers organizing and winning all across this country and pass the Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights. Let's make caregiving jobs good jobs today and into the future. And let's extend New Deal federal labor and wage standards to include every domestic worker. Let's finish that job. I think of this as what we can do together, what we can do for each other. Child care, health care, free college, paychecks, entrepreneurship, the list goes on. African Americans have gotten the short end of the stick generation after generation. But we have a chance to change that, a chance to build an America where that's no longer true. 2020 is our chance to build a better tomorrow for every American. Building a country that works not just for those at the top, but works for everyone, starts with protecting our democracy. And right now, our democracy is broken. How do I know? Because Brian Kemp is sitting in Stacey Abrams' chair. And we are all grateful to Stacey for what she's doing to make sure that never happens again in this country. Boy, connect the dots. Voter suppression is just one more relic of Jim Crow, and we need to say so. So that's why I have a plan to strengthen voting in America. It starts with restoring the Voting Rights Act. But let's not stop there. Let's pass a constitutional amendment establishing the right of every American citizen to vote and to get that vote counted. Let's overturn every single racist voter suppression law in this country. Let's outlaw partisan gerrymandering. And let's Let's overturn Citizens United. Democracy is not for sale. And there's more. It's time to live our values. Look at the 4 words etched above the Supreme Court. Equal justice under law. But justice is not equal in America. We all know and say the names of those whose lives have been cut short with callous indifference by law enforcement. Let's honor Ayanna Stanley Jones, Rekia Boyd, Corinne Gaines, Sandra Bland, Tatiana Jefferson by reforming our criminal justice system once and for all. We criminalize too many things, we send too many people to jail, and we keep them there for too long. It's time for real change, and I have a plan for how we can do it together. And here's where it starts. Repeal the 1994 crime bill. Legalize marijuana. Undo the legacy of the war on drugs. End the cash bail system and every law that criminalizes poverty. End private prisons. No one should make a profit locking people up. Now, I know what some people are thinking. That's a lot of change. It'll never happen. The fight is too hard. But here's how I see it. This isn't about whether or not we start a fight. We're already in a fight. This is about how we win that fight. So let me tell you one more story. In 1924, a generation after the Washing Society of Atlanta organized on these very streets, a little girl was born to a washerwoman. Now, as a child, she watched her mother work, washing, drying, and ironing day after day. By the time she was 9 years old, the little girl and her younger brother had started helping. They went door to door, picking up dirty laundry in a little wagon. And day after day, they washed and rinsed and dried laundry. It was there, in her mother's house, that Dorothy Bolden learned about hard work. Dorothy grew up, she married, she had 6 kids. She worked a lot of different jobs to support her family. But she always returned to domestic work. The way she saw it, domestic workers are counselors, doctors, nurses, and caregivers. They hold families together. And nearly a century after the end of enslavement, they continued to do the work for little pay and even less respect. But Dorothy Bolden knew, you don't get what you don't fight for. And that's why, in the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement, Dorothy was in the fight. At a time when the laws restricted where she could eat or which restroom she could use, Dorothy was loud and insistent, fighting for better pay for domestic workers. Now, one of her neighbors was a man who was leading the fight, for big structural change. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Dr. King encouraged Dorothy to lead this fight. So she mapped out a plan. She started with the hundreds of working women she rode the bus with every day. She turned those bus rides into union meetings, and she turned her fellow passengers into a labor group that would fight for the rights of all domestic workers. And together, they launched the National Domestic Workers of America, the first union with real power for domestic workers in American history. And today, the National Domestic Workers Alliance is leading the fight for fairness and justice for domestic workers. Dorothy's union built economic and political power right here in Atlanta. And then she went on to represent domestic workers all across this country. Together, they raise wages and improve working conditions for the Black domestic workers who clean and cook and the ones who do the laundry. Dorothy Bolden showed that one very determined woman, backed up by many people across this country, can deliver big structural change. From the boldness of Atlanta's washerwomen to the courage of Dorothy Bolden, Black history teaches us that the only way to win is to get in the fight. It shows us that the fight for justice will never be over. With every win, a bigger win stands just around the corner. With every inch we take on the moral arc of justice, we make an extra mile possible. Yeah, there's a lot at stake in this election. And I know people are scared. But the washerwomen were not afraid. Dorothy Bolden was not afraid. I am not afraid. And you can't be afraid either. I've been called persistent in my time, and I love it. But understand this, it is the persistence of generations of Black women and Black people in America, up to and including many people in this crowd tonight. That is the true story of American persistence. This is a moment in our history when that persistence can change the lives of every American for the better. This is our moment to dream big, fight hard, and win. Thank you.
Give it up for Senator Elizabeth Warren one more time. So we're gonna take some pictures?
Yes.
Let's do it.
So we're going to have our line form to my right, you all's left. So start to form your line over here. If you have a young child.